Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Soul Symphony. Thank you for tuning in. So, today I'll go over, just as a reminder, if you're on a healing journey, I hope this content helps you and inspires you in your healing journey. If you're not on one, please feel free to pass it along to someone who might actually need the content. When you decide to go on one, just make sure that you come and get on this content, and I hope that it will help you in the future. So today I'll go over father wound. Father wound is just a deep-seated emotional, psychological, and I will say also relational. Um, I would say wounding that actually happens during childhood, and it's most likely coming from. It's deeply rooted, but I would say that it stemmed from a father figure or a father, but it can be biological or not. It doesn't really matter. It just have to be somebody who is there actually as a father figure who is there to provide that loving and caring male figure to the child during childhood. When that person is absent, it can be emotional absence, physical absence, as well as abuse, right? If the person is abusive, critical, hypercritical, especially, that's something that can keep the child in a certain state of mind of wounding. And that state of mind will actually continue into adulthood and can create several different problems in the emotional, psychological, and relational aspects of life. So in that sense, it's very important for us to understand that it's not only the physical absence, because in so many cultures we kind of associate um, the absence of the father physically being the only actually reason of father wounding. But the father wound is not only physical absence. The father can be present, but it's the father is not really emotionally involved in the child's developmental stages, especially from 0 to 7, which is very critical. 0 to 7 to 0 to 8, really, that's very critical for a child to be able to have that model, that role model to show what it takes, what actually it means to have a father or a father figure in their life. Because the mother and the father, we both parent, they're both parents, but they both bring different aspects that are very important in developmental stage of a child. So therefore, the father figure or the father is there to bring this other aspect. And depending on if it's a boy or a girl, those aspects can be slightly different. And so that's the reason why father wound actually affect boys and girls in a different way. So the same as mother wound, they have common factors. They have common, I would say, manifestations. They have common manifestations as well as mother wound. The same as mother wound. If you go back on my mother wound video, the same manifestations are also present in father wound, but certain aspects are different because of the role of the father being so much different than the role of the mother in a child's life. So those two things actually have overlapping aspects, but they have also specific things that they show up as in a child. And that's very important because it's not only in the developmental stage that the child will be affected, but it's something that can actually continue the rest of the child's life as an adult, as a teenager, as an adult, if it's not addressed. And especially as an adult in relationships. That's something that is very prominent in relationships. It can be platonic and mostly in romantic relationships, because that's when it's the certain aspects of modeling a father can actually um, be asked, right? Especially when we become parents. When we become parents, it's at that moment that we are required to model to our child what it means to be actually a parent, to parent them and guide them in a proper direction, to give them all the different tools that are needed through life for them to actually become the best person, the best human being possible. But if we grow up without that model of a a father or the a father, right? The father was not there emotionally, physically, or was abusive, right? Because it's not only a physical or emotional. It can also, if abuse is present, neglect, abuse, or just emotional unavailability, the parent can be still there and not really bond with the child and not want to willingly want to actually be emotionally available to the child. And that can also be detrimental because the child mostly can grow up with the feeling of not being enough. And that's in both cases, girls or boys. It's mostly shows as the father wound mostly shows as not feeling, not being good enough. And it can also show as fear of intimacy, perfectionism, or attachment. Attachment in the sense that in the unhealthy attachment style, not the healthy one, which I spoke in one of my videos, I believe in the insecurity video. The attachment styles that are the unhealthy ones are those two, avoidant and anxious, which I'll make an entire video on because it's very important for us to understand our attachment style. Because many older issues, unfortunately, many older traumatic issues do actually have a correlation to our attachment style. So if we understand our attachment style and be able to um, heal that portion of our trauma, it's more likely for us to have the older ones that are correlated actually be minimized or disappear altogether. So it's very important for us to understand our attachment style because our attachment style is linked to so many different behavior patterns that we do not sometimes, we're not very conscious that we actually doing certain things. But our attachment style is the very reason why we behave certain way. So once we understand our attachment style, we can actually tackle so many different issues that are also linked to our trauma. And developmental trauma is mostly, so many developmental trauma is linked to attachment style, and father wound is one of it, and insecurities, and so many older ones. And I'll go over it as we go through. So the relational part of things, for sure, when we look at romantic relationships, right? The romantic relationships, we're more likely to actually repeat the same patterns that we have seen in childhood. If our parent was abusive to us, critical to us, neglectful, not really emotionally available, that's more likely something that we are more likely to actually model. I will not say model, but I will say actually, well, model to our children for sure if we have children in that relationship. But most likely, we will actually do the same exact thing that we were taught as a child because that's the only model we have, especially when it comes to boys. When a boy grows up and becomes a father himself or themselves, they are more likely to actually become their own father. Unfortunately, when it comes to behavior in general, most behaviors, if for example, I would say toxic toxic masculinity, that's something that goes from father to son, unfortunately, and so on, and it goes from generation to generation because we see our father do certain things, right? Being a womanizer or being stoic in a toxic way or whatever that pattern is that is unhealthy. A son kind of, it picks those patterns from the father, and that those same patterns continue, and that those same patterns are more likely to follow the next generations and so on, unless one of the sons eventually breaks that, right, and realize that that's very unhealthy pattern and heal through the trauma, and therefore that will stop from that person. Otherwise, it's something that is mostly cyclical and it keeps going until one of the generational rule breakers breaks that specific rule that is unhealthy within that family dynamic. So making sure that we understand also that the difference between the two, sons and daughters, the way that father wound actually presents itself in men is most likely showing as aggressive behavior, emotional numbness, we have also a lot of difficulties with authorities. And that's the difficulty with authorities, actually something that we see at early age. And children who actually throw tantrums and they do not want to listen, they don't want to follow the rules. And it kind of shows a lot in the school system. Once a child, and it can actually eventually be diagnosed as, I would not say, it can be diagnosed as all the mental health issues, right? So that's unfortunately where it can lead to eventually if it's not controlled, or if it becomes overboard. So it's very important for us to understand that it's not just in the household that it can be detrimental, or it can also be detrimental in other institutions. So therefore, the child is more likely to end up in trouble with the law and end up in prison, or just in other things that is not very much good for their life, right? So it can be a tool, unfortunately, to destroy their entire life, because again, they don't have that structure. They have not learned that structure from a father or father figure to be able to understand that certain things are toxic, certain things are unhealthy, certain patterns, and not continue them or break them, right? So that's kind of the aggression, especially, right, that can lead to violence and abuse. It can be physical, emotional, for sure, in a relationship. So that's also the dysregulation, the emotional dysregulation side of father wound. So it cannot. It's not only. It's not only on the emotionals. It's not only shown physically. It's also on the emotional side of things. That person will have emotions that are very dysregulated. So it's important for us to understand that our children, the way we teach our children, what we put in our children, and their environment is very much 100% directly correlates to how they behave, how they grow up, how they actually become members of society, and also the repercussions of their actions as members of society. It can be a make or break in their on their entire life, or it can also be a make or break in the relationships, right? The not just romantic ones, platonic, work relationships, and family members too, because someone cannot be controlled, who cannot control their emotions, is more likely to spill their emotions on other people, being aggressive, being emotionally abusive, physically abusive. And therefore, it's important for us to see that and correct it as soon as possible, especially in our children. As adults, there are so many different things that we can do. Therapy is definitely one of it. The awareness of it is the part. Once we aware of it, and making sure that we actually address it. First of all, going back to all the way to see, to understand actually where it's coming from. Once we understand where it's coming from, then addressing it from there. And in women, it most likely becomes trust issues, right? It becomes trust issues, and being attracted to actually people who are emotionally unavailable. Emotionally, man, women being attracted to man or the opposite sex, or not even, it doesn't have to be the opposite sex. It can be the same sex if it's the same sex relationship, right? But still, there are people who actually are emotionally unavailable. It's the main component, that how it presents, how father one presents itself in women. The father is mostly the fact that the father was not actually available enough to provide that safety component to the girl, to the daughter. That safety component is what actually builds the trust with the daughter. The father becomes a trustworthy person to the daughter by giving that safe space, by being there as and by being there as the pillar, I would say the pillar of trust for her, right? The pillar of trust for the daughter. If the father is not able to actually provide that safety component, the pillar of trust, Therefore, the daughter is more likely to actually feel unsafe. And the safety component is what actually is very important for the trust. You cannot trust someone if you do not feel safe with them. And that's what happens also in adulthood, that they can't the daughter as an adult can unfortunately end up in a relationship with someone that they do not actually feel safe with. And that's also an abusive relationship. The main reason sometimes women stay, because not feeling safe is not something that is dysfunctional for them, because they grew up in an environment like that. They grew up having a father who's actually have not given them anything to model safety, to model trust. So therefore, they don't really recognize if it's trust, if there's trust or there's no trust. It's very hard to pinpoint something that we don't even know what it looks like, right? So that's actually the biggest component for women when it comes to father wound. Being able to have that trust component in a relationship, the safety component in a relationship. So when we don't have that, we still don't see that as something that is abnormal. We stay in the abusive relationship because it's normalized since our childhood. We have lived that. We find it normal. Therefore, we stay and we don't really try to leave, even when people are telling us it's not safe. In order for many women who suffer from father wound, the only reason they will actually leave abusive relationships, unfortunately, is when it becomes life threatening. That's most of the time the only reason, right? Unfortunately, when it's just at a certain level, we still don't see it as unsafe, because again, our nervous system has been familiar to that similar environment. And also, women can become overachievers, perfectionists, because again, they did not receive that component of of I would say that pillar that is there to actually provide them that safety, that protection. And it's not only safety, safety is also linked to protection. When you don't feel protected by someone, you most likely, at least in general, right? In general, we most likely to rely on ourselves for that protection. And as a little girl, when you do not have that father who's there as that protector, that safety, that protector to provide safety and trust, right? We grow up as women, as grown women, in by just ourselves, single women and married women too, later on, being overachievers, wanting to make sure that we are safe, providing ourselves that financial safety for ourselves, providing ourselves with that job security. We don't sit down and rely on people to actually help us or to do things for us. We making sure that we are good on our own. And sometimes that can be detrimental, right? Hyper independence can be detrimental. And I do not condemn being independent, but just making sure that we understand that anything in excess is actually detrimental to us, including independence. It's because we do not want to rely so much on only ourselves that we do not give room for our partner to actually fulfill their role in our life. Because when you have a partner, a husband, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, right? There are certain components they actually bring to the relationship. That's what make the compatibility part of things. That's also make us be compatible, not only compatible, but we complement each other. People complement each other when they get into a relationship. You bring certain things that are missing with me, with my life, or with my character, and I bring certain things that complement yours. So therefore, we complement each other. Compatibility is not necessarily complementation. So we complement each other. We're supposed to complement each other in a relationship. So when we are hyper independent, we do not allow the other person to actually bring the assets that they're supposed to bring to actually make that relationship richer, right? So we kind of do everything. So therefore their role becomes so minimized, and that can actually be detrimental. That can be detrimental. That can turn into micromanaging. That can be detrimental into, it can turn into also criticism because we micromanaging what they're doing because it's not the way we do it as a hyper independent perfectionist person. So therefore that can be a just door that we do not want to open in a relationship because it can be very detrimental in a relationship. And it's not only in relationship, romantic relationships, right? That specific example is just for romantic relationships, but it's not necessarily only romantic relationships. It's also in all the other relationships. When we're a friend with someone, we bring certain things to the table the other person does not bring. So therefore, when we meet up and we exchange ideas or certain things, we complement each other, right? We talk about certain things, we complement each other. So all the same as a work relationship, when we are a team in on a project, right? Each team member brings certain qualities to the project that other team members do not bring. So therefore, we all bring our ideas, our unique ideas to the project and make the project really good and really nice, right? The result is very good and is very appealing and it's very I would say it's very functional. Functional in a way that is way better than if it's just one person with their only one idea. So therefore, we have to be mindful of that. But the father wound is not only something that is impacting, negatively impacting our romantic relationships, it also impacts all the other parts in our life. So all the other parts in our life, it has the I would say the possibilities of impacting all the aspects of our life. Now, the biggest thing to understand is the core belief. The core belief is really that the child always kind of feels unlovable, unworthy of affection, right? And and sometimes, unfortunately, that grows into resentment, and the child can resent that father or that father figure for not being present for them because they feel like they were not good enough to be loved or they're not worthy enough of the presence, the father being present or physically, emotionally, or not, right? So therefore the child is more likely to have these resentful feelings. The resentful feelings can actually trickle to a resent, not only resenting that specific father figure or father who was not present, but a resentment, actually resentment to all the male figures too. So all the male figures, all the authority figures, and anyone that for sure looks like the dad, right? Uncles, grandfather, and so on, and even sometimes siblings, brothers, or so on. So that's kind of unfortunately where it can also be not so good when it comes to not healing that specific wound. It can be what aspects in the sense of resentment. Now, the making sure that the biggest thing is for us when we healing father wound is making sure that first of all we are aware that it's there. It's the awareness in any trauma. When it comes to healing trauma, the awareness is the number one thing. When we don't know something is there, there's no way we can heal it. In order for us to know that we actually need healing, we have to know that it's actually present. The presence is there, therefore it needs to be addressed. If we do not know that it's present, we would not be able to address it and heal it to begin with. Now, once we know that it's there, investigation is the next one. Investigating, asking ourselves, is it the reason I'm behaving the way I'm behaving? What are the specific behaviors this father would triggering out of me? What should I do next? Who should I talk to? When did it start? Because when you go to a therapist, there are certain things, certain questions the therapist will ask. And that's sometimes most of the questions will be like, what, when, where, how, right? So what are you feeling? How are you feeling it? What's happening? What happened in the past? When did you realize that you're feeling that way? How did it happen? Did it happen during a crash? Did it happen? Was it an accident? Was it during an assault? Was it just something that happened in a household? Or assaults happen in households too, unfortunately. But there are so many different type of traumas, right? So is it during war? Whatever that is, were you a veteran? So they will ask so many different questions. It's mostly what, when, how, and where. So it's all those, I call them the W's, but the H one, how, does not have a W, it has it at the end. But still, I call them the four W's just to make sure that we understand our four W's. What are we feeling? When did it start? Where did it start? How did it start? Now, those things are certain, the awareness part of things, just to know those things is very important. I'm feeling these things. I got to be aware of it's there. That's number one. What is it? Pinpoint it, right? And then how did it start? When did it start? Where did it start? All those is something that is a good idea to document, because when we go to a therapist, the therapist will ask us these same questions. And for them to actually have a, where do we start? How can I even help you? I need to know that information to be able to help you. And then if it's a father that was also lost in the process, like passed away, that's a whole different thing, because that comes with also grieving. That's not a father that physically just left. That's a different type of, I would say, therapeutic requirement, because it's not like that person just voluntarily got up and left, right? So sometimes that grievance part of things is something that can take a long time. It can take a long time. It can take years, especially as a child. If we don't understand what grieving someone who passed away means, there is no way we can actually let go of that feeling of resentment, or that feeling of knowing that this person just left because of uncontrollable circumstances. So that's something to be mindful of. And then when it comes to the inner work, just making sure that self validation, right? Making sure that we understand that to validate ourselves, it's okay to feel a certain way, to accept ourselves, to tell ourselves that it's okay to feel a certain way, because no one is perfect. And it's okay to not put all those feelings, push them down and bottle them, because that can actually trigger anxiety later on. When we feel a certain way, especially emotionally, it's okay to express them. It's okay to talk to somebody. A therapist for sure will be one, counselor, group therapy, right? There are so many different things that we can do. And then setting healthy boundaries. Because when we have healthy boundaries, we allow ourselves to actually feel and really feel our feelings without other people coming into the picture to actually distract us or disturb us from how we feel, or try to tell us how we feel. First of that's the biggest part, is not allowing other people to dictate how you feel. You know how you feel. You know how you feel. You should be able to identify your feelings, exactly what they are, what triggers them, not allowing other people to come and tell us exactly how we feel, when actually we're the ones in that body. We're the one with that mind who's feeling what we feeling, right? And not other people. So therefore there's no place for other people to dictate how we feel. So we have to be mindful of that. Healthy boundaries. When somebody is here trying to get into our space to tell us how we feel or how we shouldn't feel, or somebody will tell you, oh, that happened 20 years ago, get over it, right? It's not their place to tell you what you should feel and when you should feel it and how you should feel it, because everybody takes everybody different time frame to actually heal a specific trauma. The same trauma two people can sustain, one person can actually heal that trauma within 2 days, 3 days, 2 months. And the other person, it can take them 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, right? So therefore, it's not people's place to tell us to get over something that happened to us. It's that's where the boundaries come into play. And making sure that we are not negatively talking to ourselves and blaming ourselves for what happened. Because unfortunately, a father wound happens in childhood. And as a child, we are not we are not equipped with the strength, the knowledge, nor any other things out there really to make sure that we take ourselves out of that situation, especially when it comes to neglect and emotional abuse, right? Because we don't know better. So therefore, there's no way we could have done better. Now, as an adult, it's a good idea once we are in an environment where we are actually the ones subjected to that we remove ourselves. At that point, we have certain tools to use to be able to remove ourselves in that situation. But as a child, it's not something that we could have done for ourselves, to save ourselves, to advocate for ourselves, to protect ourselves. So it's very important for us to not internalize that negative talk, that negative belief that it's our fault that we got abused. It's our fault that we actually were we sustain certain things, right? That neglect or that emotional or physical abuse is not our fault. It happened because it happened, unfortunately. Now, moving forward, it's not it's in our detriment to just keep that, unfortunately, inside. It's a good idea to actually just tell ourselves. And once we see ourselves going into that loop of negative thinking, it's very much important for us to remove ourselves from that negative thinking and kind of just see it as at the child level, not as an adult level. As an adult, of course, we could do something about abuse because there are so many resources that we can go and use to actually protect ourselves and remove ourselves. But as a child, we don't have that. We don't have that knowledge. We don't have that access. We don't have none of that. So it's very important for us to remove ourselves from that loop of negative belief, negative self talk once we start that. Just to be mindful that we're actually doing it and removing ourselves from that loop. Now, reframing our thought process is very important, which is the same as when we reframe our thought process, we are less likely to negatively talk to ourselves, to negatively blame ourselves. There is no such thing as positive blame, but all blame is negative. So therefore, not blaming ourselves, period, that what happened to us is our fault. Even as an adult, what happened to us as an adult is never our fault. Is never our fault. So therefore, that reframing our mindset is the key to forgiveness, forgiving ourselves for being subjected to such abuse, especially as a child, forgiving ourselves for not being able to advocate for ourselves, accepting that it happened, forgiving the other person actually who subjected the abuse to us. That's very important because forgiveness is not for the person itself who did it, is actually for us. Because when we forgive other people, we are actually setting ourselves to heal the trauma and not hold on to it and letting the trauma go and letting the process happen the way it's supposed to happen when it comes to healing. So it's very important for us to make sure that we forgive not only us, but we forgive the person or the people who actually subjected us to that abuse. Or that in this case for the father one is for the father, forgiving them, because like I say in so many of my old videos, most of our parents who subjects us to certain traumas, unfortunately, they have their own trauma because they model what they have been modeled, what they have been taught. That's what they actually model, and that's what they raise us to also model as we grow up as adults. So therefore, it's very important for us to make sure we understand that certain traumas are cyclical, certain traumas are generational. There's not much we can do about it at the time that we actually realize that we have sustained that trauma. What we can do the most that we can do is make sure we heal, because by healing we actually destroy that cycle. So therefore our children would not learn the trauma, we would not model the trauma to our children for them to actually carry to the next generation. All right. So that's the biggest thing, making sure that we reframe our mind frame, reframing our mind frame, and then to release that emotional burden. And affirmations, right? Affirmations to increase our self-love, self-worth, making sure that we take care of ourselves on a daily basis when it comes to eating, sleeping, exercising, moving around, making sure that we do things that uplift us, and be around people who also uplift us, making sure that we're doing therapy, the specific therapy that works for us, right? Making sure sometimes also find a trauma specialist, because there are so many trauma specialists out there that can actually help with the specific trauma that we have. Sometimes therapists are more generalized, and they're more likely to just listen to us. But when it comes to trauma, it's sometimes so deep rooted that it needs somebody who's actually very versed in the subject to be able to just create a very specific plan for that specific person, right? Now, not I'm not saying therapists don't do that, but I'm saying that most therapists are generalized in their in verse in many different topics. And so finding someone who actually specializes in trauma is a great thing to do if your insurance covers it. If not, I mean, all the things work too. Just might work differently, but that's all it is. So so I will say it again and again in every video. Please, please, please take care of yourself, right? Like I mentioned, just make sure that you do all the different mindful things that you do daily to make sure that you are okay, that you are going, you are advancing, you having progress into your healing journey. And even if you don't see progress, that doesn't mean that progress is not happening. It's just sometimes slow. And sometimes it's just slow and therefore we don't really see it, but it's still happening. So just being patient with ourselves as we healing and as we continue in our journey. So until next time, take care. Bye bye.